Okay, now our second session of today, and this session will be conducted by a team from German company Materna, and Daniel and Paul both are software developers, contrary to previous presentation, and it's interesting to look at what we're all doing from a developer perspective. And what is very important, they both are consultants, because their company main business consulting, not development of product, but using these products. And they use different products from IBM, probably FICA, I'm not sure what who else they use, but it's always fun to listen. Daniel presented many times, and it's always was fun when he shares some customer stories. And today they're going to talk about less established OMG standards called SDMN. It's a shared data model annotation, but this is a standard that's going to be used by different already well-known standards, DMN, BPM, and others. And so their perspective and practical use of this standard certainly would be an interest for many of our attendees. Daniel, Paul, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jacob, for the introduction. Yes, today we're going to talk about the SDMN standard. We already seen in the last presentation some models and some kind of information about the standard, but we want to take a look at what the standard is about and ask the question, can SDMN solve the data chaos in business process modeling? Yeah, let me start by explaining the bold claim that we have that a data chaos is in business process modeling. We use some of BPM Plus standards in our project. We work at Materna, as already mentioned, in the public sector, where we modernize and optimize processes for public authorities. There we work with BPMN to model our processes and combine it with DMN for decision logic. Both use the same data structures and work on a similar databases. We have specific data elements that are frequently used by multiple models. For example, if we have an address of a participant, it is used in a business process model and also in the decision logic. But the definition for those data elements are in different places for each standard. So each standard has to define its own way for this data element. This means we have redundancy because the similar data has to be stored in two different places and in two different standards. We have inconsistency and maintenance burden if we want to make a change on the data structures and are not very careful. So we can maybe have this inconsistent state, which can lead to more problems. And therefore, this is the new standard, the SDMN standard. For those of you who don't know it sounds like a special DMN or something, but it has not that much to do with DMN. It's the shared data model and notation. So it's about shared data between models. Let's look at the agenda for today. First of all, I will look into the SDMN standard and give you an introduction to some key concepts and the purpose of this. And then I will look how to integrate it into the BPM Plus ecosystem. After that, Daniel will make a walkthrough of a practical example on a concrete use case to illustrate the advantages of SDMN. And then he will discuss some challenges and opportunities of the standard and look into future perspectives. So we are not the only ones who have seen this data chaos problem and identified this. The OMG has also seen it as an issue and is currently developing a solution. As part of some extensions for the BPM Plus family, they introduced the new SDMN standard, which is built on top of another new standard, which I will introduce to you, the SCE standard. They both had their 1.0 beta released last year. First of all, SCE. SCE stands for Specification Column Elements. The purpose of SCE is to provide a set of structural elements that are common to BPM Plus specifications and other OMG standards. So the idea is that they have a common foundation across different specifications. It occurred during the development of SDMN. They were looking for patterns seen in other standards to define this common foundation. And they have some common elements where other classes and other standards can inherit from on a more technical level. Then we have SDMN. SDMN uses this SCE components. Maybe future OMG specifications also adopt it. And SDMN stands for the Shared Data Model Annotation, as I said, and is claimed as the fourth pillar of the BPM Plus stack, representing data. As we see on the left-hand side of the presentation, we have our triple crown with BPMN with processes, CMMN with cases, and DMN with decision services. And now we have the fourth pillar with SDMN and the shared data model. What it does, it defines a central collection of data elements, which then can be used by each other standard, like in processes or decision services. What exactly the SDMN standard is, we will investigate this and how it is structured in the next slides. SDMN is built upon the structures provided by SCE, and both of these standards try to ensure consistency, maintainability, and interoperability between the standards. Let's now get an overview of SDMN. As I said, SDMN provides a collection of data elements. We have two main elements. One is the data items and item definitions. You may know these terms if you work with other standards. They serve as the source for data elements of BPMN, CMMN, and DMN models. The specification deals with various implementations of data elements. They looked into the other standards and how these implement data, and they try to make the standard to be compatible with each different implementation across the other standards. However, the standard is not only works in combination with the other BPM Plus standards. It also had its own functionality because it enables the visualization of data elements with the help of two diagrams. One we have already seen in the last presentation where data is visualized. Yes. Now let's look into the elements. First of all, a data item. A data item represents a piece of information of any nature, ranging from unstructured to structured and simple to complex. If you look at the right-hand side, we can see a small example in healthcare where we have a patient. A patient is then any piece of information, and it can also have relationships to other data items, like it owns a health record and maybe a list of appointments. The structure, language, or format is described then in the associated item definition, the other element. But before we look into the item definition, I want to show you the data item diagram. This is the way of visualizing the data items. They can be connected with 4 different connector types, where you can see we have a containment. Containment is like the patient data who is in folder, and we can, the patient health record and the demographics are part of this folder. Next, we have a reference connection. This is between, for example, here, the patient information and the demographics, because the patient information references the attributes in demographics. Next, we have the composition. Composition is a common term. Inside this diagram, we see the patient information has a list of appointments. And this composition means that if we delete the patient information, also his appointments are deleted. At last, we have an association. Association is kind of like a mapping between a source and a target. In this diagram, we have it at the bottom between appointment and scheduled appointment. This just means that we have an expression to map an appointment to a scheduled appointment and backwards. Next, we have the next element, or the other big element. It's the item definition. It defines the structure of any object. For those of you who are deep into the DMN standard, they also have item definitions, and SDMN builds like a wrapper around the DMN item definition. So it's not really that different to the thing in DMN. It contains some more attributes to be compatible with the other standards. But as you can see on the right side, we have a small example again of the patient type. This time we can see the attributes of the patient, which has a name, an age, and also a relationship to another item definition, the appointment item definition. And we can see that they can connect to each other. This is what the item definition diagram looks like. We've seen it in the last presentation with another example, and this is the example from the standard in the context of healthcare. Kind of like a relational database model, for those of you who know this. It organized the data into structured two-dimensional tables. And we can see that, we have two different types of item definitions. We have a simple type, like for example T6, where we have only one attribute, which is the value of the item definition. In this time it's just a simple text with also some allowed values like male and female. Then we have another type, which is the complex type. These are the more bigger tables, like the patient health record, where we have more than one attribute, like the patient's name and other. Then we also can have connections between those tables. For example, a reference connection between the patient health record and the demographics, where the patient health record just references the demographics of its patient. And then we have the composition. Composition, once again, similar to the one in the data item, where the target is part of the source. And if we delete the patient health record, also the appointments are deleted, again with this special arrow. Now let's see how the data elements from SDMN fit into the other standards. For those of you who know the other standards, there are some very similar wordings and symbols. If we look at the data item, we have this kind of same thing in BPMN with an item aware element, which is any object like data input, data output, data store, and other things. We have similar things in DMN with an information item, which may be a data input or a decision output, and in CMMN with case file items. These are like similar to the data item in SDMN. As you can see in the symbols, it's this kind of document symbol, which is used in all of the standards. And for item definitions, we also have item definitions in each standard. In, for example, BPMN, it's also called item definition. DMNN is also item definition, and SDMN is here based on this item definition, and CMNN has a case file item definition. Now, we want to look how SDMN works together with the other standards. SDMN aims to provide a common basis for all BPM Plus standards. So it says like all the important things to be compatible with these other standards. For example, a data item in SDMN has the attribute item kind. This defines the nature of the data item. Possible values are physical, information, conceptual, and others. And it's shown here in this table. And as we can see, it exists in BPMN, where there's also an item kind attribute, but this only has two possible values with physical information. CMMN has a definition type, which is similar to an item kind and uses most of the possible values. And DMNN has no equivalent of item kind. So we see that SDMN tries to collect every attribute and every possible element of the other standards and combines them together. We also see some things that are not in other standards, for example, the connector, as a containment connector, composition connector, and reference connector. They're not available in the other language. They are only for SDMN. They are part of this data item diagram, which we saw before. So it means not every SDMN standard element or attribute is contained in the other standards. We just have a basis for everything and the SDMN standard itself. Let's now take a look how we integrate this into our models. We first, or how the procedure would look for modeling data with SDMN. First, we define our data items and item definitions inside SDMN. Then we can import these definitions and items into our desired model. All of the BPM Plus standards offer an option where we can import data models or other models into our own model. And then inside the BPM Plus model, for example, DMN, we can just reference the definitions or use the items to build up our model. Luckily, as I said before, SDMN elements are fully compatible with the BPM Plus elements, so we have consistency and reusability across this whole stack. Now I want to show two examples. I mean, this is kind of technical, but we only look at the simple things, diagrams on the right. In SDMN, we define an item definition, which is only a name, which has a string as the type. And we can then just import this SDMN item definition into our BPMN model, and then use it as a reference in our, for example, in this data input. Same goes for DMN. We can also just import the SDMN file in our model, and then we can just reference the item definition we defined in SDMN and use it in our DMN, in our decision logic. This is everything about the overview. So we learned the two most important elements and how we can integrate them, and that SDMN also works on its own if we use the data item diagram and the item definition diagram. I hope everyone could follow me, and Daniel will now take the next part.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, we'll talk about our practical experience with SDMN. So what are our projects and where we can use SDMN? And then later on, probably the more important part is to look where BPMN gives you benefits in your projects and where are also some leaks and some improvements needed in this standard. So first of all, our project fundamentals. Yeah, as Paul mentioned, we are working in the public sector. We have mostly custom environments projects where we have some laws and regularities from the EU or national ones. And so we build this software to follow these laws, and it's mostly forms or something like this, from paper to digital. Our customers, so the custom officers, have no or less technical background. So most of our requirements are at the moment recorded in Word documents. And in the last 3 years, we brought them to use standards like BPMN for process model and also decision models with DMN. And our experience is that also with no technical background, this is something you can understand, even if you are not a software developer, or even you are just something from a custom officer or something like this. So we have quite a lot of different persons working on these projects. As I mentioned, the business expert, the custom officers, then we have a lot of requirements engineer to support these people developing things like BPMN diagrams or decision models. And of course, to bring it into software from our part, we are making the development of these BPMN models, for example, using decision engines like Camunda or Red Hat for decisions. That's mostly our project. And what's important at this point is that we are using different tools. So from the requirement perspective, the BPMN diagrams are modeled in ARIS. It's a software from the Software AG. Then we have our DMN models modeled with DECLab, a software from Materna. And the data structure using in both the BPMN and the DMN models is mostly modeled also in ARIS. And there we have different tools which can not always communicate with each other. So how does this data modeling look like? First of all, we have one vocabulary per business case. So one business case is mostly one application we are building. And as you see on the right, this is a proprietary self-created format inside ours. And it's not really readable. So we have different business objects. You can see some kind of relationship. You see all the attributes, or for example, we are using often something like alias names for different business objects, but it's not very handleable at this moment. So also, as I mentioned, different tools, they can't all work on these models. So we have some kind of naming convention. So for example, in a DMN diagram, if we are working with a data object, we use the same names as in this ARIS model. And as you can imagine, this is really a pain point with a lot of errors and problems we have with this. So we thought perhaps SDMN can solve these problems for us. And to sum up the problems, as I mentioned, we have worked out a proprietary format which is not usable outside of ARIS and with other standards. So that's a big pain point. Then you've seen the picture before, is not the best graphical representation, especially if you have complex data definitions or data objects. And it's a mess to find certain attributes or something like this. And the last one, we have this media breaks and switches between tools. So there are often errors by misspellings, misunderstandings of any alias. And in our opinion, these are all problems that can be solved using SDMN. So as Paul mentioned, the SDMN standard, there are some points that are already really good using in real-world projects. First of all, the standard itself, it's really simple. So it's about 50 pages from the OMG and the standard describing. It's really good to understand also the dependencies between different data objects. So you don't have just an ER model or something like this where you have a very detailed look, but you have some kind of similar to decision requirement diagrams. These data item diagrams are really helpful also at the beginning of the requirements to understand from an upper point of view what items do we have, what data structures do we have. Then we have also familiar structures. So for example, the item definition, which is quite similar to ER models. So especially technical people understand the structures, but it's also not that complicated that even people with no technical background, like requirements engineer, can easily understand what's modeled in SDMN. And then, as Paul mentioned, the integration between, mostly in our cases, BPMN and DMN diagrams is really easy with the import. So there are no hurdles to get it to work with different kinds of diagrams. And as mentioned, it's based on the SCE standards. So especially in further versions also of the other standards, we see a big advantage to bring this idea of the BPM Plus crown to shine also with SDMN. And at last, as Paul mentioned, you don't always need this integration into BPMN and DMN. The S diagram itself is quite valuable for the requirement engineers. It's, like I mentioned, similar to the DMN standard, where you don't need to integrate it also in a whole BPMN diagram, but it also works on its own. And in our opinion and experience, it gives a big advantage at this point. So, as I mentioned, the standard is quite new. It's still in the beta, and there are, from our point of view, some improvements that can be made. The standard itself, in our opinion, there's a bit a lack of representation of relationship. So this is a subject where we would like to see a more advanced model to bring all kind of data structures in SDMN. Then, as I mentioned, the standard is quite short. In our experience, there are some next understanding and examples how you really interchange with other diagrams. So this is something that can be improved. And we've seen that we would like to see BPMN messages also being part of the SDMN standard, because at the moment this is not yet supported for BPMN models and SDMN. Perhaps the more important part is the organizational improvements. So yeah, first of all, it's like in the beginning with DMN, we have a standard, but the tool vendors doesn't support it yet. As we've seen in the last presentation with Trisotech, they are doing a really great integration of SDMN, and there you also can see the advantages of it. But at the moment, there aren't that many vendors supporting the SDMN standard in their tools, like, for example, Red Hat or Camunda. Then you have to understand what need to be changes in further version, for example, to integrate it fully with SCE in the BPMN standard. It's a bit open what needs to be done is with this standard to fully integrate it for the BPMN plus Chrome. Then, of course, the standard is at the moment at the OMG at the beta status for quite a long time already. And yeah, that's something our customers doesn't really like. If you come and tell them there's a new standard and it's quite helpful, and then you have to tell them it's in a beta status. So it's like, yeah, using snapshot versions in the software development. That's not quite often seen. And there we have some hurdles to convince our customer to use it already. So yeah, in general, in our opinion, the OMG must commit to the standard and to the whole BPMN plus Chrome and what's have been developed there. There are more standard actually in the beta status. And yeah, there haven't been much movement in the last year. From a general point of view, one of our ideas would be to bring FEEL into the SDMN standard. So at the moment, FEEL or SFEEL and BP FEEL is part of the DMN standard. And what we see out there is that FEEL itself is often used not only in combination with DMN, but for example, Camunda uses it as a language. And therefore, because it's from the subject quite near to data and to manipulating data structures, perhaps it would be an idea to bring the FEEL from DMN into the SDMN standard, to have one standard to model data and also to manipulate it with a quite simple language. And then something we often come across is that the name SDMN is quite confusing. So always when we are talking about SDMN, there's this question, is this DMN, and what is to do it with DMN? And yeah, this name is not that practical from our point of view, to say so. Yeah, so in general, in our opinion, the SDMN standard added a lot of values, especially when you're using BPMN and DMN already. Just to have one database you have to manipulate, and it's always up to date to the models, and you don't have this problem with multiple points where you have this data item definitions. But also it is quite useful on its own to discuss with customers about their data items, to get a first glance at what their data definitions look like. So there we see a lot of potential. But yes, as mentioned, the OMG must commit to the standard. Otherwise, I think it would be hard to get it out there. Or, I mean, we have seen this with DMN in the last years. It was a long way to get the standard into the wild and to the tool vendors and to the customers. And I think with SDMN, we could do it better. So yeah, we are quite a bit early, but are there any questions about SDMN?
Daniel, I expected to see some examples, real examples, not just theoretical things. Can you show us some use of this on any particular
we can't
process?
we can't show this project directly. We have most of the problem is that there's a lack of tools. So we are building our own tools at the moment to support SDMN. But that's the reason why we build these things like our data structure and ours. So there we are just on the working front to get our own tools to model SDMN. That's a real problem at the moment to show this.
But you mentioned that TriceAttack already has implementation of this standard, and maybe Denis can comment out of this or give us example.
Sure. Well, in terms of example, we just Stefan had a quite elaborate example, and maybe you can interact with Stefan on the elaborate SDMN model that he created for insurance. Just a couple of things. Thank you for a great presentation. That's a very good presentation on SDMN. Really appreciate it. I do invite you to submit your issues to the OMG officially. You can do that quite easily with a form, and that would be very useful. To your question about OMG, must commit to that. If I put my SDMN team member hat on, it is fully committed. It is in the backlog of different standards that need to be published. OMG, as you know, manage hundreds of standards, and there's only one official editor for the OMG. So sometimes the backlog gets a little high. So that's the only reason it hasn't migrated yet to an official version, but that should be hopefully resolved soon. So the commitment is there. As for SCE, the intent is to bring it in within DMN, BPMN, and CMMN. As you may know, right now, there's only DMN that has an active revision task force. And there it is part of the discussions we're having on how to bring SCE in DMN. The challenge is always in terms of breaking versions. So while we're in revision task force, we cannot do things that are not backward compatible. Therefore, to move something that would be breaking backward compatibility, we need a new version. So that would mean a new version of BPMN, a new version of CMMN, and a new version of potentially DMN. It's not clear if we can slide it into DMN itself. That's something that the team is actively looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, especially for BPMN, I believe the standard is quite stable over the last years. So I think there's a big hurdle to integrate this with a new version.
Yeah, so the standard don't stop you from doing these things. So for example, at TriceAttack, we've been using FEAL as the expression language in BPMN and CMMN for more than 10 or 12 years. I presented this at the DecisionCAMP many years ago. And you can also integrate SDMN and BPMN and CMMN quite easily. As you mentioned, the intent was, and that's what we've done, is we use the item definition structure from DMN because it existed, where in CMN there was a notion of CMIS kind of integration, and in BPMN it was more left to schemas and different things. So you can still do the work within the parameters of the standards, but it'd be nice to have it all integrated. The challenge we have now is lack of resource. What happens is most of the work on the BPM Plus suite of standards is done by a similar nucleus with few more people floating around on each front. So where we have resources to move forward is in DMN. For example, there are two other standards that are brewing within OMG that are related to the BPM Plus family. There's one that's called KPBMN, which is for knowledge package, where you can package all these interdependent models into a single knowledge package. And there's another one, which is PPMN, which is pedigree and provenance modeling and notation for tracking the pedigree and the provenance of different models, because as you move forward, we need a way to confirm these things. So those are brewing also within the OMG. They've been brewing for quite a few years, actually. SCE was an idea that I submitted, again, 10 or 12 years ago about unification of the language that just came about, and we were able to slip it under SDMN. So happy to answer any questions, and I want to give it back to, thank you, Daniel. This is a great presentation, and please ask question to Daniel.
Denis, just still one question to you, and probably Daniel can address this, or Paul. So you do support, you're the only implementer of this standard today. So do you support this referential integrity when you delete patient information, all related appointments would be automatically deleted?
That's part of the platform, not part of the standards. So the standard only tells you how to create logical data models. So you just structure your logical data model and leaves at that abstract. So other features are left to the vendors within their own tools. So and Camunda has an implementation of SDMN. I'm not sure if it's public and if it's general available, but they were testing with us when we were working on the development of SDMN. They were quite active in the SDMN development too. So if it's not live, it could be just in the plumbing behind and people don't know, or maybe it's coming live soon, but I cannot comment of their status.
Okay, let's involve more people. Please ask your questions. It's data integrity and common data standard for different decision intelligence technologies really important. So hopefully people would ask questions and we have enough time. No? Okay, maybe I still, because I'm really interested in this, because, you know, we all understand the importance of common data model for this, and it's really important. And especially when you mention referential integrity and related all different types of standardized relationships between our data, it is important. But I'm just, when I saw this development, I was surprised. If I remember correctly, like 15 or actually almost 20 years ago, OMG already produced a standard. It was called Ontology Definition Meta Model, ODM, like IBM system. Are you familiar with this?
No, we aren't.
OMG. Because basically what you just described, it's an attempt to define ontology without using RDF or OWL language, correct? And so it looks like OMG failed, And you said they just in beta, but that time they were not in beta. They went to first release or maybe a few more releases, and then nothing happened. I never had this any progress for many years. And it brings me, actually, first question is why you practical guys who actually apply this in real world examples, why are you so keen on implementation of something that provided by standard body? It's a good intention, but it's not, there are not too many implementations, and you're working on this. Why? What's the reason? Your customers ask you? Or?
Yeah, mostly because of our customers. So they are quite conservative with new standards and technologies. So as I mentioned, they have written about 30 years in Word documents their requirements. And to bring them from there to something I would call new, to make it more structured, this is a huge way we have to go. And at one point, we have committed to something like the BPMN, where we started with. And so this is the circle we are trying to bring in.
I just want to make a point that what this topic about shared data modeling is so many times discussed in semantic web communities. And as you know, DecisionCAMP is one of event in declarative AI that's running in parallel with us right now. But we never were able to actually integrate semantic web with what we're doing. They do have a reasoning engine, not exactly what Peter Voss or Dr. Gupta spoke about, but it is reasoning on RDF structures, on semantic ontologies. And this is development because it's always stuck, nothing practical. And that's why even what you just said, you criticized OMG, and Denis, it's good that Denis is so active in this area, and hopefully it would be progress. But there are some alternative approach. Instead of waiting for somebody to implement this, and instead of waiting for this, some very experienced people started to go in alternative way. For example, I put in our chat reference to MetaSpecs. This is a company created by Vincent Letra, but together with Brian Straustrup, author of C++. And if you look at this, they create this ontology from the very beginning without inventing new language. Of course, it's elements of C++, but so it's for you developers, it should be okay. But I strongly recommend you to look at this because you can, in no time, you can build quite complex ontology-based system. And another question again, how to integrate their system ontology with our decision services. But still, this is certainly a direction that we should not ignore. So just follow this link and maybe you would enjoy it. Anyway,
thank you.
Go ahead. Any questions or comments? No? Okay. Daniel, any custom stories what you want to share? Something interesting happened in Materna development in last several years?
What we see is a way better understanding of the DMN standards. As especially we are at the version 1.5, and we've seen a lot of improvement from our customers at this topic. Mostly because we can tell the end-to-end story. So we have the tools at the beginning for the requirements engineer, and also, as Stephen mentioned, to test these models, which is a huge advantage since the tools support it. But going forward until production, where we run these decisions, for example, we are using Red Hat as an engine, and there we've seen a huge advantage in the last 2 years, I would say. So it's quite nice to see, because I know since 2017, since I'm attending to the DecisionCAMP, there was also this discussion. We have a great standard, but nobody wants to use it. And we always ask, what's the problem with this? And it's nice to see that it's already used, even if this all AI subject is coming up. But in our opinion, AI and mostly decision help each other really well. And it's not a concurrent situation between them. So that's real nice to see in the last years, even in real world projects.
And you are practical guys who developed real world decision models.
Yeah.
Do you have experience already applying latest LLM based tools?
Not yet, because, well, in the public sector, our customer is not that open-minded, I would say, to these tools. Mostly he's trying to build up his own LMNs and his own infrastructure to build these models. So there we are a bit behind the schedule. But what we see, for example, in our DecisionCAMP tool for modeling is that we have something like a visual requirement engineer supporting the custom officers to model this data, mostly because it helps them. They don't have this blank sheet where they have to start, but we are using LLMs to give the regularities and the laws into the system, and then build the first version of, for example, DRGs, on which then the customer can proceed. So there we see a big use case, but later on there's a big question area at the moment.
Great. I'm also glad that the new generation of people coming, and Paul and young developers, that's great to see new faces. And I really hope, guys, next year you will present some of your experience in this area, probably with SDMN or with some other tools. But something, it's always, I know that when you guys participate, it means something practical is coming. Okay, hope to see you next year. Go ahead, any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.